and welcome to All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arper. Surprise, surprise. And today I'm in conversation with Cindy Casciani. And I'm really excited about this conversation because what Cindy doesn't know about non-executive director and chair recruitment, you could write on a postage stamp. She has a depth and a wealth of experience about the kinds of tensions that can arise when a CEO or the C-suite are, having to bring in a chair or a non-exec. And she also has a wealth of knowledge about the magic that can happen. So let's dive into the conversation. Welcome, Cindy. How amazing to have you guesting on All Things Conflict. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because you have such a wealth of experience with boards, non-executives, entrepreneurs, all that kind of leadership, top of the hierarchy stuff. And maybe you can just introduce yourself a little bit for us.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me on, Maria. It's a pleasure to be here. So I have been working around sort of boards for about 30 years, actually. So initially, when I was at 3i, and I was as part of their sort of independent director program, placing non-execs and chairs across the boards of 3i portfolio companies. And a lot of those actually were quite challenging situations that had been invested in by 3i many years ago and had been kind of left alone to get on with running their business. And then an initiative came along that what was called the SMI initiative, and the plan was to try to regain some control over those investments to ultimately exit them. So we were trying to introduce chairs and non-executive directors onto boards of companies that really didn't want them. They'd been quite happily left alone for quite some time. So that was quite an interesting sort of start at working around boards and the value actually that getting the right chair or non-exec can make. And then since then, I've been recruiting chairs and non-executive directors. I have my own business now with a colleague called Talent 4, and our focus is very much around chair and non-exec directors and CFOs and FDs onto primarily the boards of scaling businesses, often with private equity funding, but not always. And we also work really closely around the sort of social investment space through a relationship with Better Society Capital.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that first sort of introduction you were talking about at 3i. And I was thinking that you must have experienced every kind of reaction imaginable to that. And I guess then you cut your teeth on some pretty serious kind of resentments and perhaps welcomings and education and all sorts of things. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean it was. I mean, I was really quite young when I was doing that, so I was still only sort of in my mid to late 20s, with very limited experience actually of dealing directly with business owners. And we had the whole gamut. So we had family companies that had taken, as I say, a small investment from 3i many years ago and had been left, as I say, left on their own to kind of manage their business, suddenly being told that this right to appoint that had always been in the terms was now going to be initiated, and here are 3 or 4 people that we would like you to select from to be your non-executive director or chair. And yes, met with absolute sort of hysterics, and it was absolutely not wanted, but it got pushed through, and not necessarily always pushed through by me. There was an investment manager that was kind of leading that, but the selection of the candidates had very much come from me, and others who were quite grateful because they felt that they weren't there were gaps in their knowledge, they felt, as owners of the business, and this was an opportunity for them to bring in somebody that could plug some of those gaps in how you scale a business, how you grow a business, how you manage, because a lot of these actually were kind of family owned or still had some kind of family ownership there, in which there were um, conflict about, this cousin wants to be involved more because he's got a 3% shareholding. How do we manage all of this? So sometimes bringing in those non-executive directors who were completely free of any kind of family issue were able to look at what was best for the business, not the personal relationships of those, but actually look at, what is best for the business. This is what you want to do, and this is how we'll manage it. So they were able to resolve a number of those challenges, but it wasn't easy getting them in the first place. That's where the resistance was.
Yeah, so I'm imagining that your reactions would have been, personally, just kind of steep learning curve, seeing what works, what doesn't work, So in your experience, when you look back now, how did that set you in good stead for what you do now?
Um, well, partly, yes, it was kind of sitting back and digesting what was going on. So not reacting immediately to the problem, and not taking it personally, actually, that I wasn't welcome. And that still happens now. I'm still sometimes introduced to businesses to find them a chair or a non-exec director who don't want that person. The only reason they are hiring that individual is because it's a condition of the investment that they have received. So I start off those conversations with the CEO, seeing the tenseness in their body and their reaction to this idea that someone who didn't start the business, didn't take all of the pain of not taking a salary and hiring all of these people, is going to effectively come in above them, the CEO of this business. So you kind of take that, you let it get them off, you let them get it off their chest a little bit, and then kind of sit back and go, okay, well, have you ever experienced working with a chair? Have you any idea of the value that that person could bring? Do you ever have days when you don't know what to do next? You're so overwhelmed by the challenge of running this business that you would really benefit from someone as a critical friend sitting alongside you, being able to tell them everything, offload all of your business concerns, knowing that the only purpose that they have is to help you get through that and to help resolve that challenge, because that's really what you get. You have this critical friend sitting alongside you who, to whom you can offload all of your concerns and worries, knowing they don't want your job. They're not trying to derail your business. All they are there for is to make you and your business more successful. Isn't that actually something that you would find valuable? And most of the time they say, well, actually, yeah, you're right, that could be quite helpful. So then you just go around trying to find, my job then is to find the right person. And the right person isn't just based on their industry experience. It's based on how that individual thinks and that chemistry fits, and making sure that that chemistry fit really does work.
So as you were sort of describing, the benefits, I suddenly felt things loosen. I could imagine people going from imagining that they were going to get exposed. I should imagine a lot of people's imposter syndrome, alarms go off. I'm going to get exposed. All my weaknesses are going to show up where I've been able to kind of hold it all together. So suddenly thinking, oh my God, I could have a friend here. So I could feel that. And then, as you say, the job of kind of finding the right person and just getting the recipe correct.
Mm, yeah, you're right. I mean, it is that case actually, that they do start off thinking that the person coming in, particularly when the appointment's being driven by an investor, um, there is this feeling that this person isn't coming in to help me. They're coming in to keep an eye on me for the investor, and their sole purpose is to report back to the investor. And eventually, I will lose my business because that's. But so yeah, you have to kind of turn that around, and you have to persuade them that this is really valuable for you and your personal growth, as well as the success of the business. And you can, I say, you there are plenty of times when I've kind of followed up years after and spoken to that CEO. And when it's done right, the feedback is always, I just wish I'd had that person in my business sooner. I mean, they do go wrong sometimes, but when it works, it really works, and it's so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember the very first time I had a mentor, a business mentor, and it was such a revelation to me that there was this person who could just objectively look at things and just ask a few pertinent questions with no criticism intended, and that's, we all need support. That's a big part of the society we live in, the business world, the harsh realities is we don't teach people that we need support. We all need support. It's not a sign of weakness.
No, I think that's right, and it is a very lonely job running your own business. I mean, I have a client at the moment who he's 37. He set up a business 8 years ago. It's going well. He raised some funding before Christmas, but he is acutely aware of the thing that there are many things he doesn't know how to deal with that are coming along the path, and he has a quite a talented team of people around him, but they all look to him to answer every question and concern that they have, and he doesn't feel he always has the answer. And he feels this enormous burden on his shoulders. So I'm working with him at the moment to find him a chair. And even just the process of meeting candidates was a really helpful thing for him, because he had this kind of free consultancy, this mentorship in each of those interviews where he was very open about the challenges and open about, I say, that the unknowns that are coming, that these people have seen before. They're more experienced than him, they're much older than him, so they've seen much more across multiple businesses. And there's a sort of calmness that comes from that, and that calmness can then be passed down onto him. So I mean, we're at the point where I think, he's about to appoint his first chair, and he's actually really excited about it because he can now feel that he's got someone. I keep using the phrase critical friend, but it's just such a good kind of catch-all of what you of what you get. And he was another one who was quite cynical about the idea of hiring someone to start with. Again, it was driven by the investor, but just the process of feeling I'm not on my own anymore. I actually have someone that I can talk to. And like you say, if you can't bottle everything up and be able to be successful and effective without some outlet. And I say, in my world, that outlet is often a chair or a non-exec director that is on the side of the CEO and wants them to succeed.
Yeah, because when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, the CEO who's been running the business, you know, loses sight of just how much, the buck stops with them, and it becomes a way of life, and it becomes habitual, and it just takes somebody to, as I said, to sort of loosen the strings a bit.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. It is. I say, it's lonely, and you have the burden of responsibility on your shoulders, and just to have an outlet for that, is so valuable.
So obviously, happy days, I come to you. You've got a wealth of experience, and I'm sure you do, put a lot of diligence into that sort of people matching. But, tell me about when it goes wrong. What happens when it goes wrong, when someone takes on an NED and it just isn't a fit, or a chair, or somebody comes in and there's just no fit.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, that doesn't happen that often. But I do have obviously no names, no patois, but I do have a couple of examples where it hasn't worked. And even though we'd had a very sort of diligent process, this was, again, it was a founder-run business, bringing in the first chair. It was a female chair. And I think part of the problem there was that it was her first chair role. So she had been CEO of a business very successfully. And there was a need in this business to have a chair who was going to be sort of hands-on and involved. But the problem, and I think, this is quite often the problem when non-exec roles don't work, is that sometimes the individual isn't quite ready to be as non-executive as the role requires. And in this particular situation, as part of her own sort of onboarding and induction, she'd spent quite a lot of time in the business asking questions of the sort of second tier management and below. And that unearthed a few questions about the CEO. So he wasn't liking the fact that it was opening up some wounds about his performance as the CEO and his sort of management style. And I think she was maybe slightly more direct in the way that she approached it with him. And in the end, they ended up having quite a ding dong. And he asked her to leave. So I mean, in the end, I think she only lasted about 3 months. And I think, looking back on that, what she was doing was right, to try and benefit the business. But what probably a more seasoned chair would have done would have been a bit more of a subtle conversation with the CEO. He would have been slightly more aware of how quickly he was going to find that and how quickly his defenses would come up. And it would have been more effective to have had a bit more subtlety around that. I think she was maybe just a bit too direct.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes in mediation, I will often find myself saying, to one party where things have escalated, would often find myself saying, when I listen to you, the content and the gifts you're trying to bring are absolutely beautiful, but the packaging is terrible.
Mm, yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think, if I look at other ones that haven't been as successful, it has generally been around those people connections. It's never about the experience and that they bring. It's always around how do you manage delivering those difficult messages to people and thinking about what it's like to be on the receiving end. I have an old boss who was very good at giving me advice on how I would deliver things to people, and I'd always been quite abrupt and direct. And he gave me this great piece of advice, which was like, people don't always have to know what you're thinking when you talk to them, Cindy. And that really resonated with me and has actually stayed with me constantly ever since. Actually, and when I deal with people, is thinking about what it's like to receive the message I'm giving them, rather than them knowing I'm annoyed or I'm disappointed or whatever. So yes, I think it's a helpful piece of advice.
Yeah, that is a helpful piece of advice. It puts things into perspective because on the one hand, people don't always need to know what you're thinking. On the one hand, we can give away far too much and it could actually be harmful or boring or uninteresting or missing the point, or I'm trying to talk about you but I'm making it about me. And then the other side of that is not giving enough to a conversation. So you're leaving somebody in a state of guessing and not knowing, leaving a person in a state of uncertainty. And I think that's, this place of communication and connection that I think is the sweet spot.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it is. Yes, it's just understand. I say it's understanding people, isn't it? It all comes down to understanding human relations, and perhaps sometimes just thinking more about putting yourself in the shoes of the people you're talking to, and not always coming again. Chairs that are the most successful chairs in my network are the ones who aren't trying to find the solution and aren't trying to tell. They are trying to give tools so that the CEO and the management team find their own solution, and are empowered because they've solved the problem themselves. The chair is just the kind of the conduit, or the catalyst to getting there, rather than being dogmatic and saying this is what you need to do and this is how you do it. There has to be an ownership of that decision, particularly when it's your own business.
Yeah, so the chair's role is that to facilitate, to make things
Yeah,
easier
absolutely.
and to be supportive
Yeah.
and to help someone, see possibilities where maybe they were, hitting a barrier.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Help them see the wood for the trees, help them take a step back. Sometimes it's not easy to do that when you're day to day in the business, worrying about paying payroll or, is this big account going to fall? It's so difficult to sometimes take that step back and think, or to even project forward about, what's the strategy that we're going to have for the next year? How are we going to grow? And again, that's where the chair is so valuable, because he or she can pull you back into thinking about it much more broadly and get you away from being bogged down in the day to day.
Yeah, so then it sounds to me as if a really good chair, an effective chair, would be like an oasis, you're out in the desert and then there's this lovely place you can come to for a bit of hydration and nourishment.
Yes, what a lovely way of putting it. Yes, a bit of hydration, nourishment, advice, some kind words. I mean, again, you kind of go back to, we talk about how, all of these things are about people and how people react to things. And, I've said before, it's lonely being a CEO, which it is. But you also, how often does the CEO ever have anyone
Mm,
say, "Good job, well
mm,
done, that's
mm.
brilliant"? And everybody needs to be told occasionally that something that they have done, particularly a decision that is made in isolation without very much support, in you know in a rush. It's the right. It's just nice to have somebody there that goes, well done, that was really good. And even if it's the wrong decision, you can have a chat, having somebody tell you that wasn't, you did a great job, but maybe what we need to do actually is this, to sort of pivot and move around. I say it's human nature, isn't it, to want someone around you that supports you and acknowledges sometimes the good work that you've done.
Yeah, you just took me right back to childhood then, and I just wonder if there's any value in this. But I remember I went to a grammar school where nothing was ever good enough. It didn't really matter how hard you worked; there was always another layer that you could achieve. And I didn't find that helpful. I found it, and actually the rebel in me then just kind of came out in my teens. And then I remember as a young adult going off and having some private singing lessons and having this singing teacher who just said, "Well done. That was great." Even when it was crapola, even when the notes were all wrong, or whatever. All she would say is, "Good job, well done." And something in me just loosened and warmed, and I'd never experienced that before. So that was what resonated for me. And I wonder how much our school experiences affect us later on.
Mm. Yeah, no, no, that's a funny story, and I love that. And you're right. I think it does. I think we're all a product, aren't we, of every other thing that has happened to us in our life. And and you're right. Lots of schools didn't do a particularly good job, and they still don't. My children are still in school. I'm not sure they are particularly good at being told, "Well done, that was really good." It's just your uniform isn't quite on right, and your homework was late, and that sort of stuff. So yes, I think praise is overlooked though generally, and I particularly think the higher up in a small business in particular, the higher up you are in that business, or if you're the owner or the founder, there's a pressure on you to do that to the people that work for you, and to encourage them, and to thank them. But it never works the other way. And I say that's where there's a value to having a board structure. So you've got a non-exec director or a chair who can just give you that reassurance every now and again that you're doing a good job.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. So you've just completed or got the results of a survey on board dynamics. Have I got that right? Yes, I think so. Yes. And I was hoping that you might, tell us what's been revealed.
Thank you. Yes, well, we did it. We conducted this survey with Catalysis Advisory, who are a management due diligence business. We went out in total, we got about 170 responses from private equity investors, chairs of private equity backed businesses, and the CEOs of private equity backed businesses. And the initial reason for doing the survey was, because I'd had a client, a CEO of a PE-backed business, who was looking to hire a chair, and he had felt very much this huge amount of pressure from the investor to hire a particular individual that went along with the investor's kind of objectives. And he wanted to hire a chair, but he wanted to hire his own chair, an independent person that had no previous relationship with the investor. So that got us to conduct this survey, which became much more sort of much more widely looking at how well is the role of a chair understood by the CEOs that are largely having to appoint them? How much is, how likely is it that the whole appointment process is driven by investors? And how effective are investors as board members? Because most of the time they have a kind of very siloed experience. They are finance people, care about the finance, they've often never run a business. And how often is board effectiveness ever really challenged? So even if you run a survey or conduct some kind of board review of the CEO, the CFO, whoever else might sit on at an executive level on the board, how often is the chair or the non-exec director ever included in that board review? And what are the things that we could do better to make this whole thing work more smoothly? So a few of the things that came out of that were simple things, really. I mean, it's often the simple things that aren't looked at and the more complicated things that people spend time on. So we kind of discovered from the survey that there was a pretty poor approach to scoping out the role of a chair in all of these circumstances. So it was almost, the brief to a search partner or the brief to the team was, we just want a good all-round chair, a good egg, someone who's done this before. No real thought around these are the challenges that the business has. These are the kind of individual challenges that the CEO and the rest of the board have. We need a chair to kind of balance that. So, we've suggested that much more time is spent at the beginning scoping out what the role deliverables are. What do we need this person to do? What are the challenges they are to address? And therefore enable whoever is going to be leading that search for a chair to look in the right sort of places and have the right mindset to go into that organization. It also came out quite strongly that there was very little attention given to onboarding those individuals when they came in, that it was almost like, here you are, day one, you're chair of the business, you just go away and you find a way to make yourself useful around the business, as opposed to some kind of effective onboarding plan that you would have for any full-time hire. So again, that was one of the things that came out of it, is, let's approach any recruitment in the business the same way. You don't just differentiate between a non-executive and an executive, because if you really want to get value out of someone, you've got to open up what the business needs and where where some of the challenges are. And I think, the other thing that came out of that was around sort of the investor from the private equity house, perhaps making sure that you've got the right person sitting on the board, not necessarily a default that you did the deal, therefore you sit on the board. Think about what skills various different investors might have that can bring value to that organization through perhaps some of the other boards they sit on. So you can start to have some kind of cross pollination, if you like, across their portfolio companies. I don't think that comes out that isn't done enough. So it was very interesting. There was some really rich data. People were very generous with their time in offering it up. I mean, I say generally it was positive. There was a lot of there was a strong belief that having a chair in place does create value for the business for all of the reasons that we've discussed, but that maybe it's the processes that need looking at rather than the function itself.
And so, what that leads me to think is then out of that survey, you'll be probably refining some of what you offer and how you offer it, because you're that conduit between the two. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I think it certainly made me. I mean, I would say I was a pretty strong on doing this anyway, but it certainly made me made sure that I will push back a little bit more with investors when they kind of say, this is what we want. This desire to make sure that you actually really get it right up front. It's a bit like, with a computer, if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. If you don't invest the time to really think about what you need at the beginning, then you're going to be, it's lucky if you get the appointment right. And sometimes it will just work, but much more, much more focus around, are you sure that's what you really need? How important really is sector? Is that not just a red herring that makes life easy to pin the appointment on? Let's think much more around what are the challenges that the business is currently facing. What do the executive team look like? Are there holes in the executive team? Do we need to sort of think about how we plug those? And let's factor all of that into what this profile of individual looks like. And let's try and find somebody that can cover those gaps.
Yeah, and in my world, what I would say is that the more we have those conversations, the more effort we put into seeking what we want and creating the right match. Energetically, you've created the right space.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's there's no excuse, but it's quite an easy thing to do, to kind of not invest time in that. And I know, and I think also out of that is, if you are, again, I'm sort of talking in the world of recruitment, but if you are going to use a search partner to help you on any piece of recruitment, it doesn't have to be at board level. I think you have to also buy into that process and give time to it, because it's a bit of an iterative process. It's not just, here you go, here's your brief, now come back to me when you've got the candidates. If you don't invest in that whole process, then you're really missing out on the opportunity to refine and to get feedback. I mean, I think one of the good things about going out to search, whoever it might be, at whatever size and scale the company is you get some market feedback on your business. I often get people going, oh, that sounds like an amazing business, or, oh, I've never heard of them, or whatever that might be, or, oh no, I know so-and-so says that they aren't to be touched. That's all valuable market information that you might not want to hear it always, but it doesn't mean it isn't valuable to hear it. And I think there's a really good process that comes out of just being professional and sensible about your approach to running any kind of recruitment process.
Yeah, because I think the trap is to believe that we've outsourced something and we don't have to put any effort into it.
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
outsourced that, so Cindy will take care of that. But there, you use that word partnership, and that requires us to be in relationship, and out of that relationship, we can then manifest something that fits the brief.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't put the time in, then how can you expect it to work? Sometimes it will, but and also I think just by putting in the time is a demonstration of your commitment to it as well. So if you are leaving it, hands off, and it's sort of like, yeah, it's with Cindy and I'll worry about it when she comes back to me, the sense I get is you're not really bought into this. So therefore, the interviews that you run, you won't necessarily approach those in the right way. So you won't get the best out of them, and you might not show your best self either, because again, when you're interviewing somebody for a role, it's easy to assume that you have all the power, but actually they are interviewing you too. They don't have
Oh,
to take the job.
absolutely. Yeah.
So you have to show the best version of yourself and the best version of your business if you actually want to attract the quality of individual that you want. And I think that gets forgotten quite a lot.
Yes, because that comes down to the image of your firm, and the image of what you're producing, the image of yourself, and these things. It always. I think one of the things that used to really piss me off years ago was taxi drivers who, when I'm a pedestrian, treat me like crap, not realising that I used to spend a fortune on taxis. I'm also a taxi customer, and not realising that you meet people through all parts of your system.
Yeah, no. You do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always believed that you just have to treat everybody well, because you never know when they're going to appear in your life in different ways. Yeah, so just, always, if you always treat everybody well, then they're never going to come back with a story about some time when you didn't.
Yeah. Wow. Sage advice there. Well, Cindy, this has been a joy to listen to you. And part of the reason it's been such a joy is because two things. One, you clearly know what you're doing. You clearly have that base of real on the ground experience and knowledge. And secondly, you're so passionate about what you're doing. It really is just so lovely to listen to you and to hear you. So this has been a really wonderful time together. If people, are interested, which I'm sure they will be, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Cindy Casciani, and also we have a website for the company. It's www.talent4group.com, and all of my contact details are on there. And I would be delighted to hear from anybody. As you say, I am quite passionate about my subject matter, and always keen to talk about it. So yes, if anyone wants to reach out and get in touch, I'd be delighted to hear from them. And thank you. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for inviting me along.
well, I'm certainly already thinking of some advice I want from you. So I will be in touch. I'll be first in line. Thank you for doing this. It's been an absolute joy.
It's been my pleasure, Maria. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye bye.